boss got a phone call and he was like, how soon can you have your bags packed? And so like I spent the next 24 hours hitchhiking on helicopters across southern Afghanistan. All of a sudden it was like super real.
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of my conversation with my cousin, Patrick O'Keefe. And here he shares his stories from his first deployment in Afghanistan. And while we chat about a wide range of things, we do talk about some pretty traumatic events, including a story about an IED explosion. So I just wanted to put a disclaimer out there in case anyone may be triggered by these topics. Patrick does have a really positive outlook on things, and he does find a way to make light of many experiences and has that comedic relief, but I do want to make sure I put that out there in case this is not a comfortable topic for some people. So with all that being said, here is part 2 with Patrick O'Keefe. So when you graduated college and then boom, you were thrown into it basically. Like, what was that transition out of college like when you first started with the Army?
So it was pretty wild. Like, so I knew pretty early that I was going to this unit and that they were deploying, right? And I contacted them and they're like, yeah, you're going to go, like, whenever you get here. It was obviously like pretty exciting, right? Because again, like, this is all I had dreamed of doing, like, forever, right? And like, when I first got over to Afghanistan, right? Like, because I didn't think about it too much, like, beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got over there, I worked on staff. They were full on lieutenants, right? So I like worked in the operations, like, planning. So I had some time there to kind of like acclimate and figure out what was going on and like continuously be annoying about like, hey, when am I going to be platoon leader? Right. Like,
yeah,
when am I going to get out of this desk job? And then like all of a sudden it was like one night, my boss like got a phone call and like closed the door to his office. And I was like, oh man, what's that about? Right.
Ooh, juicy.
And then he came back out and he was like, how soon can you have your bags packed? And I was like,
am I going home?
like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't that. I was just like, why? Like, what's going on, right? And he was like, well, this guy down in Alpha Troop, his platoon leader just got fired. So, like, you need to be on a helicopter tomorrow morning to, like, go out to Fob Azazula and, like, take over this guy's platoon. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Like,
let me just pack up my things.
All of a sudden, it was, like, super real, right? Like, and there's that, like, immediate feeling that, like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah. You're like, I don't need these pens and highlighters anymore.
Yeah, like I don't need this fucking laptop. But, because before, right, like there had eventually been a timeline that was like, oh, like in June, right, you're going to go to this platoon, you're going to work side by side with the outgoing platoon leader, and he'll like show you the ropes, and you get to know everybody, and then you'll eventually transition to like fully take over, right? But so that's like where my mind was, and then all of a sudden, this is like early May or something, it was like, hey, grab your bags, and like in 24 hours you need to be at this place, and like the other guy got fired, so he's not going to be there. So like, good luck. And so like I spent like the next 24 hours like hitchhiking on helicopters across southern Afghanistan to like get to where this unit was, and just like walk in like, hey, I'm the new guy, right? Like, surprise.
And how old are you? Like 24?
I was 22.
22. And you're going to be leading a group of how many?
It was 15 guys that I took over.
Wow. And were they all around your age, older, younger?
So it was a mix. Like, so there's always a platoon sergeant, right, who's the most senior guy. He'd been in the Army for like 16 years or something. So, he's like your right-hand man. And a handful of NCOs who ranged from, 22 to 30. And then I had my enlisted soldiers who were all basically younger than me.
So what was day one like when you show up and you're like, okay, listen to me now?
Yeah, exactly. That's the big, like, paradox of like the military is that the officers, go through totally different training, right? Because we have a totally different job, right? Like our job is not to be out there like pulling triggers and like kicking down doors, right? It's to plan things, right? To coordinate between other like units like left and right of you. But like when everything goes to shit, right? Like you are the guy that everyone is going to look to like make the decision. So it's definitely, it was definitely weird like walking in, especially to this platoon who had already been in country, like working together for like, 4 months or whatever.
What sort of stuff had they been doing?
Mainly just like, patrols. That seems like it's hard to describe.
As a civilian, you like see the movies and you see the
Right.
TV shows, like what, like paint a picture for what these guys were actually doing.
Yeah, so like that's actually one of the things, right, that was most like kind of eye-opening about like Afghanistan and all this stuff, right? Like, from the movies, right? Like war is like boom, it's like big adrenaline thing, right? It's just like constant chaos and like heroism, right? Like no, like Afghanistan was really boring. Like
Interesting.
it was basically like 9 months of being like really bored, punctuated by like brief moments of like extreme adrenaline, right?
Hmm. I'm nodding like, yeah, I get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, so like the majority of the time, right? Like we would go out and it would be like, hey, go to this village and talk to this elder, right? And like find out what his deal is and like what he needs, because like this guy is pro US, right? Like so like go help him, like or, like go to this village and like these people don't like the US and like ask them questions and like try to find the bad guys, right? Like and
What?
at times it was like very frustrating because it was all an IED like fight, right? So like you don't see, it's not like gunfights and stuff, right? Like it's fighting against an enemy who like you normally don't see like face to face, right? Like they'll leave bombs on the side of the road and they'll like try to put more bombs on the side of the road or like hang them up in trees and like they'll try to intimidate the locals, right? So it's like this very weird, like, which is why, not to get like super like political or anything, but like why it's so difficult, right? To like, how are we going to end Afghanistan? Because it's not like World War II, or like you take Berlin and the Nazi regime falls, right? Like it's kind of like this faceless enemy that like looks like everybody else that lives there, and like
Yeah.
how do you fight that?
Wow.
So that's what
Okay.
I walked into, and that's what we did.
So then you go into it. So talk about your experience, like going immediately from a desk to were you then on the ground patrolling
Yeah,
like that?
so the funniest thing, like it's funny now, right? It wasn't funny at the time, but like the very first time we rolled out, we hit an IED, like literally the first time, like, and it was like, welcome to Afghanistan, right? Like, welcome to being a platoon leader, right?
Wait, can you tell me
And
about that? Can you tell me about that day?
yeah, so it was at night, and we were observing this spot, right? They're like, hey, like we think that they're hiding weapons and stuff, like in this field or like at this farm or something, right? So it was like a night thing. We were like sitting up on these hills, right? Like looking towards this spot and like, oh man, there they are. We see some dudes walking up there with like shovels and stuff, and we're like, hey, this is probably it, right? At first, we're like, hey, we just want to sit back and like watch and just kind of like, they call it like developing the situation. Like, let's see what they do, right? Like, let's catch these guys doing something bad, right? Like, um, but my boss's boss actually like came on the radio and was like, go get those guys like right now. I was like, all right, cool. Like, I guess we'll go down there. So like we drove down there, right? And as we were driving down, one of my guys like called me on the radio and he's like, hey, sir, like we've got this dude on this building over here like watching us. And I was like, okay, got it, right? Like not a whole lot we can do about it. Like we're driving around big armored vehicles, right? Like like cool, like but we drive down there, right? Turn all our lights on, we're like, hey, like what are you doing, right? And these guys they were literally just farmers, right? Like they were farmers who were like working in this field at night because it was too hot during the day,
Uh-huh.
so I was like, great, like big waste of time. Like we blew our secrecy, right? Like everyone knows we're here now, right? And we didn't even find anything. We were like, and then we're driving back, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and kind of like what we would do is we would drive in the same like tire tracks that we'd already driven in, because we knew like, the theory, right, was like there's no IED there, right? Like if we didn't blow up the first time, we're not gonna blow up the second time, right?
Yeah.
So we're driving back, and as we're passing this like little compound where the dude had been like watching us, my platoon sergeant's truck, his truck's the one that hits it. And like I still like have no idea like what the sequence of events were, right? Like I just remember we were like driving along, and then the next minute I'm like down inside, like everyone's screaming and stuff. And so that was like definitely a moment where it was like everyone was looking like, hey, so like what are we gonna do, right? Everyone was fine, right? Like there was no serious injuries. It was definitely like the like, hey, like welcome moment. Again, like it wasn't funny at the time, right? But like looking back, it's kind of funny.
I'm
That
glad you
like
can laugh about it.
very first day, right? Like very first night. It also was something that helped me like integrate to the platoon. It was one of those like stressful, like hardship things that we all went through together.
Right.
And I also didn't just like totally freak out and like lose my mind,
Yeah.
like. So
Yeah.
it bought me some credibility as like the new guy.
You're like, I literally don't remember anything that just happened, but
No, seriously.
I mean, it probably then maybe instilled a lot of confidence in you, taught you something about yourself that you can go through something that terrifying. I mean, did you ever feel like when you first started that position, you're like imposter syndrome or, fake it till you make
It's,
it?
yeah, imposter syndrome is real. Yeah, that's almost like everything. I feel like every like new job, it's like, oh great, like now they're finally gonna find out, right? Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
And
But
unfortunately for your job, it takes a bomb. But
yeah, everyone was like freaking out, but all I could think about was like one of the NCOs who had trained me was always like, hey, you don't have to be calm, like you don't have to like have it all under control. All you have to do is like look like you do and sound like you do, right? Because since you're in charge, right, like everyone will cue off of you, because they expect you to be like calm and to be like to have the situation under control. So like even if you don't, if you act like it, like everything will work out. And so like that's literally like what I did. Like I was like pretty freaked out. You just like, take a deep breath, right? Like steady your voice so it's not like shaking. And then I just started giving orders and stuff. And I started like calling on the radio to like find out what was going on and what we were gonna do and stuff. And everyone was screaming, and then everyone like calmed down, and everyone just it's like the old like cliche, like everyone like fell back on their training, right? Like and so started doing exactly what they've been trained to do,
wow.
which is like a real testament to like what the Army's able to do to like train people to like react in those situations.
Wow, that's incredible, especially for it being your first night. But from that day forward, did you have to, I'm sure you had to apply that same mentality again in another situation? Did you feel more confident? Was there another time where you still had to reel in your actual emotions and put on a front that everything was okay?
Yeah, maybe a couple small ones. Nothing to that scale, right? Which like there was so much shock value in that of just like me being the new guy and like this is my first mission. Like
Yeah.
you know, you see all the movies and you like read all these things,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean it was a big confidence builder and a big team building thing and stuff. So it definitely made the rest of the deployment like much easier.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure everything from there.
Just get out of the way early.
If that hadn't happened the whole time, at least for me, I would just be waiting on edge for something to happen.
Yeah, like when's it gonna happen?
Yeah. When's the thing gonna happen? That thing that everyone talks about.
So when we were in Afghanistan, right, we went to a lot of different places because at first, right, we were like part of a unit that would literally just go to places that were having a tough time, right, like units that were struggling against the Taliban to like reinforce them, right, to give them extra people they could put out, right, and so we just do like these random missions, right, like random places. But eventually we went to like an outpost, like up in the mountains to like protect a road, like real glamorous stuff, right? Like, but so like up there, right, there were all these like Afghan militias, right, that were fighting against the Taliban that we were like, helping and stuff. And we would go and hang out with them. We'd go and like set ambushes with them. There's this one commander who like really stood out. And this guy's name was Bacha Khan. We'd go there like overnight and we'd like do stuff with him. We always loved going there because this dude would make potato wedges. He would like have like a ton of potatoes, right, and like cut them up and like fry them for us like whenever we were there, and they were like the best potato wedges that I've ever had.
You're like, he can stay.
Seriously, but so like just talking, when you're there, just like because the goal, right, was we'd go out at night, right, and we'd like set up in like ambushes to try to like get the Taliban, right, but like they always knew we were there, right, like because they know everything, right, like they can see everything, like it's their country, but so we spent a lot of time just like talking and stuff, and this dude was like in his 40s, right, probably like early to mid 40s, right, he probably looked a lot older than he actually was, but just like talking to this dude, like he had been fighting like his entire life, like for Afghanistan, right, like so like in the 80s he fought against the Russians, and so this dude was like probably in his early 40s, and he'd probably been fighting since he was like 11 years old, right, like but like it was because he like believed that like, hey, like this is Afghanistan's my country, right, like this is I have a vision of like what I think Afghanistan can be and like how great it can be and like all these things, right, like, and he had literally dedicated like his entire life to like continuously trying to like do that, and that dude, like, unfortunately, like he's probably like dead now, just because like that area of Afghanistan is now like really bad. But it's like, I think about him a lot, like in terms of like, hey, like this dude was someone who literally, like we talk a lot about, like, oh, people dedicate their lives to something. This dude literally dedicated his life and probably gave his life for something, right? Like that, I think a lot of people, especially in today's world, would have been like, you know what, like I'm over this, right? And it's just like crazy. Like that's something that like has always stuck with me as like very, you know, inspiring, and that level of like idealism and dedication and stuff.
Wow, that's a really inspiring story. Did he have a family or anything?
Yeah, so he had a handful of sons that were sometimes also at the checkpoint, right? So it was like this whole family, right, was like dedicated. And one of his sons was like probably 10 years old or younger, right? We like take a lot for granted, obviously, right? Because there's people who are like literally like, I'm going to dedicate my entire life and like my family's going to get involved, like all this stuff, like try to, because I think my country can be better. There are things that we could be better at in the US, and like some people just aren't that dedicated about it.
Yeah, I could dedicate like 30 years of my life to something. I think I'd be pretty damn good at it if I could just have not squirrel attention span.
Yeah. Or just like getting like worn out, like, oh God, I just want to go home and like binge Netflix, right?
Yeah, we have too many options of leisure.
Yeah.
And when I think like, oh, my hard decision of like, should I look for a job in California or New York? Like, how about this guy who's sacrificing his life for his country for his entire life? I'm like, okay, I think my decisions are okay. Wow, that was an inspiring story. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. You can totally cut it because I'm not sure how it fits into anything else.
Yeah, that's not going anywhere. That was dumb.
Just for you.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in to part 2 of my conversation with Patrick. So be sure to head on over to part 3, where we dive deeper into injuries, mental health, and breaking down the stigma of seeking help. So it's all in part 3. Head on over and listen now.